Hey, thank you so much for joining us at our Crosspoint Church podcast. Now, if you're new to our podcast or maybe new to our church in general, we're just a bunch of messed up people who don't have it all together, running after a heavenly leader who loves us and meets us right where we are. We hope this message encourages you, builds your faith, and strengthens your confidence as you continue down this journey of what it means to know and follow Jesus. Enjoy this message.
Welcome again to Crosspoint. My name is Abbie, and I am so pumped to be in the room with you guys again tonight. It feels like forever since we've been in this space. It has been a couple of weeks for me, and last week we were online only. So glad to be here with those of you who are in this space and with those who are joining us online. Can we just give a little love to those who are joining us Crosspoint online this weekend? Yeah. We are in week 2 of this series that we are calling Spark, Ideas That Ignite, which means every week we get to explore some different ideas that may have the ability to move the needle on some things in our lives. And I'm really excited about where we're heading today. I'm curious, before we get there, when was the last time that you found yourself in a situation where you just had no idea what to say or how to respond to what someone has said to you? I have had a lot of examples in my life. This is a common experience for me, but one recently I was hanging out in my parents' yard, and I, from a distance, saw a Crosspoint student who I knew lived in that neighborhood, and so I was like, oh, awesome, there she is. And I started doing this awkward wave because I knew she would love it, and then about 20 seconds into this, I realized, I don't think that's her, actually. And sure enough, I realized as I'm still waving that this is just this random girl who clearly, in the midst of her brain, fear and disgust had taken control as she's looking at me like, who is this woman and why is she waving to me? And so then I start freaking out and I'm thinking what do I say now? How do I recover from this? Should I explain to her how this happened? And by the time I figured out what to say, she was already gone. She had crossed the street. And so never said anything. But, life is full of these moments when we just don't know what to say. Sometimes because things are awkward or we do things that are awkward. Sometimes because there's a communication gap. One time my husband and I were going through a Taco Bell drive-thru, and Brock decided to pay in cash, which he doesn't normally do. And so we get around, we get our food, and then before we leave, the guy in the window reaches out his hand like this. And Brock looked at him like this for a second, and then he just gave him a fist bump. And then there was this awkward moment of silence, except for my uncontrolled laughter sitting next to him. And before the Taco Bell guy said, "Sir, do you want your change?" Communication gap, happens. There are other times too when it's hard to know what to say because the people that we're in conversations with are going through some things that are so difficult. They're facing so much pain that there are times where it just seems like there's no words. We have no idea how to respond. And in these moments, I think sometimes there's this tendency that we all feel to reach for cliches, to pull out some common phrases that seem like maybe they will be reassuring. Or maybe we find ourselves avoiding, trying to not have to have these conversations, say nothing so that we don't say the wrong thing. When I was fresh out of college and just starting my first ministry job, I was totally unprepared for the year that was about to come, where we would experience tragedy after tragedy. During that year, in our community, we experienced the unexpected deaths of a high school student, 2 college students, a young parent, an infant, among other crisis moments. There was so much loss in such a short period of time, so much to process, questions that couldn't be answered, grief and emotions to work through. And one of the many things that I, as a 22-year-old, just stepping into this role, wanting so badly to love people well, to be there for the students and the families, the people who were the closest to those that we had lost, I found myself feeling both this draw towards them, but also this fear. I had no idea what was the right thing to say, the right thing to do. And what I didn't yet understand that I learned over the course of that year is that how we respond to people around us who are walking through difficult circumstances is actually a skill that we can learn. It's something that we can grow in, that we can hone intentionally. It's not something that's automatic for most of us, and yet we feel like it should be, and so we don't talk about this all that often. But I think that this is a skill that actually has the potential to spark so much change, so much hope in our relationships, in our community. And so what we're going to do today is we're going to get really practical about what it looks like to show up for people well, to love them in the midst of hard times. Because this is something that we all experience. You probably are right now. Maybe you already have someone on your mind or a list of people that you're thinking about in your life who are going through something difficult right as we speak. I think this conversation especially matters for us, for Crosspoint. And here's why. If you've never been here before, if you're just checking out Crosspoint or checking out church, what you need to know about us is that this is a place that was designed to be different than a lot of other churches that you might walk into, where you can explore faith at your own pace, where it really is okay to not have it all together. This is a place where people who have given up on church but have not given up on God can find a safe place to belong, to heal, to grow. And we're really serious about that. And here's the hard reality where I think we actually have a very unique opportunity, is that we live in a community, we live in a city, in a country that is full of people who have walked away from church or walked away from faith because of things that well-meaning people have said to them in their own moments of crisis, tragedy, in response to their questions or their pain. In her book, Searching for Sunday, the author Rachel Held Evans wrote about how she received so many letters from people with stories like this. And she said, what she heard over and over again is that when they bring their pain or their doubt or their uncomfortable truth to the church, what happens is someone immediately grabs it out of their hands and tries to fix it, tries to make it go away. Bible verses are quoted, assurances are given, plans with 10 steps and measurable results are made. And with good intentions tinged with fear, Christians scour their inventory for a cure. But I love this. There is a difference between curing and healing. And I believe that the church is called to the slow and difficult work of healing. We're called to enter into one another's pain, to anoint it as holy, and to stick around no matter the outcome. Truthfully, I love this vision of what the church should be about, and I'm so glad to tell you that this has been my personal experience here. My family and I have been at Crosspoint for the last 2 years or so, and I really have found this to be a safe place to heal. And I'm so grateful for every one of you who have been a part of that process, many of you in ways that you don't even know. And I know I'm not the only one. I could tell you a lot of stories that are not mine to tell. And I want this for every person who walks in our doors, for every person who tunes in with us, for everyone that one of us is in some way connected to. Now, I'm not at all claiming to be an expert on this topic. I fumble this all the time. I still regularly get it wrong. But the reason that we're leaning into this today is because I do get really excited about what could be sparked if we all got intentional about getting really good at caring for people. Imagine what could happen in your family, in your relationships, in your friend circles, in our community. And so that's where we're headed today. There's this author and professor at Duke University named Kate Bowler, and I followed a lot of her work for a while now, but this summer I finally read her most popular book. And this is the title of the book: Everything Happens for a Reason, and Other Lies I've Loved. In it, she tells the story of finding out that she had stage 4 colon cancer at the age of 35. Right after landing her dream job, right after giving birth to a long-awaited for newborn son. And she tells the story of how this journey sent her to this place where all of these beliefs that she didn't even realize she held started to unravel. That she started to rethink these ideas that she'd held about how she could somehow control her life with just enough determination, the positive attitude, with the right formula of faith. It's a fabulous book. And though I will say I would not recommend reading it in public. I read it on the plane on the way to Florida with some of our CSM students, and was kind of just like lost in the book, wasn't being super aware, and all of a sudden I looked over and realized that they were very concerned for my well-being because I was just sitting there weeping. And so you might want to read it at home, but I don't cry often, but this one got me. So in this book, one of the things that Bowler does is she describes 3 types of responses that she received from people who were reaching out in the wake of her diagnosis, which at the time she thought was terminal. All of these responses, she says, were well-intentioned. All of them came from people who really were trying to love her and care for her well. But what she found is none of them were as helpful as we might think they would be. The first is what she calls minimizers. And minimizers are those of us who operate from the assumption that maybe we can help people feel better by helping them see that what they're going through is not so bad, by helping them remember that things could be worse. Minimizers say things like, well, at least. I got this one a lot when I was in the midst of a series of miscarriages. I had a lot of people say to me things like, well, at least you have your son. And I would make this face and say, yeah, thanks so much. That's really helpful right now. But I get it, though. I get where this comes from. I'm also a minimizer sometimes because I think often what we're doing when we minimize other people's pain is we're imagining what we might say to ourselves if we were in their shoes. And the truth is, sometimes it's really helpful for me to put my pain to think about it through the lens of a larger perspective. But here's the key to this. Just because this is a helpful internal practice does not mean that it's helpful for me to offer this to other people. The second category of people that Bowler identifies are teachers. Teachers are people who have Googled things and are now ready to offer you all of the helpful information they have learned that you did not ask for. Teachers focus on how the person who is suffering might be able to learn or gain from what they're experiencing. And again, I wholeheartedly believe that everything that we go through in life is the raw material for growth, if we allow it to be. But the trick here is that it is not my job to offer what lessons I think might be able to be learned to a person who is in the middle of a tragedy. The third category of people she identifies are the solvers. And solvers are similar to teachers, but they take it a step further with offering a series of possible solutions. Solvers say things like, you should try fill in the blank, or have you heard about this? Or stay positive, your attitude determines your destiny. I didn't realize how often I am a solver until I realized that I have this friend who has this very distinctive face that she makes when what she's thinking in her head is, please stop offering me solutions that I didn't ask for. I first noticed her making this face to other people, and then I started noticing her make the face to me. And I don't even know if she knows that she does this, but it's been very helpful self-awareness. So I hope you have a friend like that. But here's the thing with all of these. I'm not trying to call anybody out. I'm telling you, I do all of these things too. It's natural and normal to do these. which is why I think it's so important for us to stop and think about them, to begin to notice and name our go-tos. And then to go further with the question, okay, if not that, then what? What do we do? What do we say when someone around us is facing a tragedy, when their world is unraveling as they know it? I want us to look at one instance when Jesus was faced with this very question. It's a story that we find recorded by John, who was one of Jesus' closest friends and later wrote down one of the 4 accounts of Jesus' life. And I have to give a little disclaimer. This is a big story. There's a lot going on here. And there's a lot of things that are actually pretty mystical, that may seem hard to believe or may seem confusing. This is the story of one of Jesus' most dramatic miracles, when he raises a dead man back to life. When Jesus makes the claim, "I am the resurrection and the life." But we actually aren't going to unpack any of that. All of that is a story for another day, because there is another layer of what is happening here in this encounter that often gets missed in the drama of the bigger story. And this is what I want us to focus on this human level of how Jesus responds to people who are in pain. John sets the scene by introducing us to that there was this man named Lazarus who is sick. And his sisters, Mary and Martha, send word to Jesus to update Jesus that their brother is not doing well. And then we learn a couple of important details. First, we learn that Jesus loved these people. And not just in the generic way that Jesus loves everyone, but they had this particularly unique connection. These are some of Jesus's closest friends. They're among his inner circle. We also learn pretty early on that Jesus already knows that death will not be the end of the story. In fact, when he hears the news, the first thing he says to his friends who are around him is that's not where this is headed. And then a couple of days later, Jesus says to those same friends, "Hey, let's go to Judea. Let's go to Bethany." And their response was, "Are you kidding me? Do you not remember how when we were just there a little while ago, you made people so mad that they ran us out of town? They were literally trying to kill you. Why, Jesus, would we go back there?" And Jesus responds with some kind of riddly things at first, and then he gets to the point. He says, "We have to go back because our friend Lazarus has died." To which they had to be thinking, like, didn't you just confidently say 2 days ago that he wouldn't die? What's going on here? The only response that John actually records for us is from Thomas. And this is one of those instances, I feel this way often, but where I so wish we had some clues on what tone of voice was being used. Because this is what Thomas says. He says, "Let us also go that we may die with him." And we don't know for sure, but my guess is there's some bit of sarcasm here. The Thomas is like, "Yes, great idea, Jesus. Let us also go so that we may also die with Lazarus." But they do, they go. Despite the risk of danger, despite what it may cost them, they follow Jesus' lead and they show up for their friends. And John tells us when they arrived, they find that Lazarus had already been in the tomb for 4 days. And other people had beat them there. There was this group of people who had already shown up to be there for Mary and Martha. And then we read how separately both of the sisters, Martha and then Mary, approached Jesus. And what's so interesting is that even though these are 2 different encounters, they both say the exact same thing. The first words out of their mouth to Jesus are, "Lord, if you would have been here, my brother wouldn't have died." It's the same thing that many of us in this room have expressed to God at one point or another. The same thing that perhaps the people in your life who are suffering right now, the people who have been coming to your mind, what they might be thinking. God, if only you had been here, this never would have happened. It's all your fault. This gets to the heart of why many people, perhaps even you, decide to walk away from faith. When we face circumstances and tragedies that make us think there's no way that there could be a loving God if this has happened. If you had been here. And then Jesus replies, hold on, let me explain to you why suffering exists in the world. No, it's not what he says. He says, don't worry, everything happens for a reason. No, not that either. He says, well, at least you had so many good years for him. Aren't you grateful for the relationship that you had with him? No. Jesus doesn't say any of those things. He doesn't say anything like that. John tells us that when Mary came and fell at Jesus' feet and said, if you would have been here, my brother wouldn't have died. What Jesus does is he sees her weeping. He sees the people all around her weeping, and he's deeply moved. He's greatly disturbed. If you've ever wondered how God feels when you are hurting, Jesus shows us right here. This is how God responds. When we are suffering, God is deeply moved and greatly disturbed. Anytime we see compassion, we are seeing a picture of what God is like. Anytime we find ourselves moved with compassion because of the pain that someone else is experiencing, we are getting a taste of what God feels for every one of us. The story goes on. Jesus asked them, where is he? Where have you laid him? And they said to him, Lord, come and see. They take him to Lazarus's tomb. And the next verse is the shortest verse in the entire Bible. Now, chapters and verses were not part of the original text. They were added much, much later to help us kind of find our way and make it easier to find things. And sometimes, to be honest, where they decided to put different verse breakdowns or chapter breakdowns makes little to no sense. It's like right in the middle of a sentence, right in the middle of a thought. But here, I think whoever decided that these two words held so much weight that they needed to stand on their own was actually spot on. John tells us that as Jesus stood in front of Lazarus's tomb, Jesus wept. Even though he knew there was hope, even though he had already proclaimed that this would not be the end of the story, even though it was completely unacceptable in their culture for a man, especially a rabbi, to show this level of emotion, this public display, even though Jesus knew that just a few minutes later, Lazarus would walk out of that tomb, still, Jesus weeps. He's moved by their pain, by his love for them. It's wild. Then Jesus tells them to move the stone away from the tomb, and he says this prayer that is kind of funny because it's one of those prayers that's like obviously directed to the people around, almost maybe even more than it's directed to God. And he says this. John tells us, Jesus looked up to heaven and he prays, Father, thank you for hearing me. You always hear me, but I'm saying this out loud for the sake of those who are standing here, those who are listening, so that they will believe you sent me. This is so important. Jesus is highlighting, he's making sure that no one misses that he is there. He has come to earth to represent God for us, to show us what God is like. And if Jesus was sent to show us the heart of the Father, then we can rest assured that in our pain, God is there, weeping with us, even if we are in the middle of blaming him. That God weeps with you in your sorrow, just like Jesus wept with his friends and for his friend. A little while later, after Jesus' own death and resurrection, he brings this whole idea up again, and he takes it a step further. He says, "As the Father has sent me, so I am sending you." See, just as Jesus came to embody who God is, to give us a flesh and blood example of what God's love lived out looks like, so we too are meant to be sent out to live as reflections of the heart of God. And I think part of what Jesus is trying to help us see in this moment is that people in the midst of tragedy don't need us to show up with silver linings. We need each other to show up with compassion. We need people to sit with us, to see us, to listen, sometimes even to weep with us. A few years ago, Brené Brown talked about her journey back to faith after walking away for some time, and how this story of Jesus weeping for his friends was pivotal for her. Check this out.
And it's interesting because my return to faith was definitely around that breakdown. That's when I went, but I went for the wrong reasons. I really went because I'm like, this is hard and this hurts. And in all the midlife unraveling books, they say go back to church. That's what everybody does. So I went back to church thinking that it would be like an epidural, like it would take the pain away. Like I would just replace research with church, and then church would make the pain go away. And then I write in this book I'm working on right now that it was, faith in church was not an epidural for me at all. It was like a midwife who just stood next to me saying, push. It's supposed to hurt a little bit, and so, it was a completely new experience going back for me. I thought faith would say, I'll take away the pain and discomfort. But what it ended up saying is, I'll sit with you in it. And I never thought until I found it that would be enough. But it's perfect. It's just, I don't feel alone in it anymore. And I don't feel like I did growing up, where it was a lot of, I went to Catholic school in New Orleans, and it was mostly like magical thinking. Like it was more like there's a reason for everything. If something tragic happens, it was supposed to happen. And I had a mom who was really, very Jungian, very we had a horrible loss in our neighborhood growing up, and a woman died, and her son was killed in an accident in her home, and then she was diagnosed with cancer shortly thereafter. And at the funeral, they said something when the little boy died, I think he was a toddler, said something like, and I was in upper elementary school, said, "This is not a time to grieve. That's selfish. This is a time to celebrate because, this child's with God." And that just pissed me off. I just couldn't even make sense of that. And then on the way home, my mom said, "I just want to be really clear with you that this is not a time to celebrate, that if you're sad, that's okay." And then she said, and I get really emotional, thank you for telling that, she said, "Because be assured that God is grieving today too." And I was like, huh? She goes, "God's weeping too." And I was like, well, that changes everything. And so I just think for me, it's just about being with you. And it can't take away the pain. And I think, man, when we set that up as the parameter, that does not work.
Jesus wept. That's pretty huge.
Yeah. Love weeps.
That's hopeful.
Yeah. I think that's true. I think it's a big deal.
As we wrap up today, I want us to get really practical about how this view of God can actually lead us to become people who are able to spark honest hope in the lives of the people around us. And to look at what we can offer, much like Brené describes her mom doing for her in that story. How we can offer hope in a way to people that just might change everything. A couple of tangible ways that we can mirror what God offers us the next time we encounter someone who's in the midst of a crisis. The first is we can show up. This is simple, of course, it's pretty obvious, but it takes courage. It takes intentionality. It takes being willing to be inconvenienced. I'm so thankful for the people in my life who have done this in the moments when I needed a reminder that I was not alone the most. And I bet you are too. For the people who send the texts, drop the meals, offer hugs, who go out of their way to be present, just like Jesus does for Mary and Martha and Lazarus. Another thing we can do is to be intentional with our words. It's almost always better to say something instead of saying nothing. But there are some things we can say that are better than others. And so next time you find yourself in a situation where you're like, I'm not sure what to say, steal one of these lines. I love this tool from Kate Bowler. You can find it on our website with a download, or you can take a picture now, save it for later. There's so many helpful switches here. Things like when we're tempted to promise someone that things will get better when the truth is we have no idea if that's true or not. We can try instead, oh wow, that sounds so hard. Instead of making a guess about why something has happened, instead we can just be honest. I wish I knew the right words, and I'm here for you. I'm on your team. Instead of comparing their pain to something that we've experienced, we can try instead, would you like company? Is there anything that I can pick up for you? Is there anything that I can bring you? Now, none of us are going to be perfect at this. That's not the point. It's okay that we're not, but we can practice. We can grow our awareness. We can become more intentional with the power of the words that we speak to each other. Another way we can offer hope to people around us is to be the non-anxious presence in the room. This, I think, is the best advice that I've ever been given about how to show up for people who are in the midst of hard times. I'll never forget, it was in that year of tragedy after tragedy. Early on, one of the older pastors that I worked with looked me in the eye and he said to me, listen, 90% of your job is to be the non-anxious presence in the room. And I was like, what? It's got to be more complicated than that. But our team would remind each other of this so often in that season that it's become my default. Anytime I find myself in a conversation with someone who's struggling, grieving, going through something terrible, and I can't tell you the number of times that choosing this has led to me getting to witness some really profound moments of God working in people's lives. Now, being the non-anxious presence in the room does not mean that we don't feel any fear, that we don't feel any anxiety. It means that we make a decision that we're going to deal with our own feelings somewhere else, sometime else, so that in that moment, we can offer the person in front of us a peaceful presence. This is such a gift that we can give each other to bring a non-anxious presence into high anxiety situations. You may be so amazed at what happens when you do. One more thing I'll offer that we can do when we're showing up for people in crisis, and really this is more of a long-term one, is don't forget to remember. My friend Mandy has this habit of ending funerals that she's leading by telling people to take out their phones and to mark some dates in their calendar. Birthdays, anniversaries, holidays, all of the days over the coming year that might be tender and difficult in new ways for the people closest to the person who has just passed. And she reminds everyone how much it matters to remember. After the funeral is done, after the tragedy has subsided, after the meal train has expired, after all of those initial things have passed and people have moved on, we can give people the gift of memory. To say their name, to reach out and share when a funny memory comes to our mind, to send a quick thinking of you text when one of those big dates pops up on the calendar. This is such a low effort, high yield way that we can care for each other. Of course, as we look at this list, there are so many more things that we could add here. But my hope is that as we walk out of here today, that every one of us might walk out of here reminded that the small things that we do to care for the people around us matter. That it's worth going out of our way to love people well, to spark hope in other people's lives. The band's going to lead us in one more song that really is an anthem of claiming hope for the things that perhaps you personally are walking through right now, or on behalf of the people in our lives who are in the midst of hard times. But before we sing together, first, let me pray this blessing over you. I hope that you'll find it to be a challenge and a comfort as I have. Blessed are you who have realized that life is hard. It's hard for everyone. This awareness has come at a cost. Blessed are you who gave up the myth that the good life is one of happiness, success, perfection, the life that looks beautiful on Instagram but isn't real. You who realize it's okay to not be okay, to not have a shiny life because no one does. Blessed are you who see things clearly, where struggle is everyone's normal. You walk among the fellowship of the afflicted, a club no one wants to join. And while this life isn't shiny, it does come with superpowers. Superpowers of ever-widening empathy, an existential courage that gets you back up after another fall. A deepened awe at the beauty and love that can be found amid life's rubble, like flowers that grow from the cracks in the sidewalk. These virtues blossom in you. Thank God for you. Blessed are all of us who struggle, for we are in good company, and we will never walk alone. Amen.
Thanks so much for joining us today. Take a moment to follow our podcast on your preferred platform, and be sure to download our app to stay informed on everything happening here at Crosspoint. And if you like what you heard today, don't hesitate to share it with a friend that might need to hear it too.